It was supposed to be a quick stop, a last-minute trip to pick up a few things for the road, and then I'd be on my way again. But when I pulled into that Walmart, nestled at the edge of nowhere, I had no idea that this would be the last stop I'd make. I had been driving for hours, my car the only one on the road, surrounded by endless fields of dry grass and the occasional old farmhouse. I wasn't even sure how I'd ended up so far off the beaten path, but the GPS said it was the quickest route to my destination. The sun was starting to set, and I figured I'd grab a drink and some snacks before continuing. But as soon as I parked and stepped out of the car, something felt off. The Walmart looked normal at first, big, bright, and lit up like any other store. But there was an emptiness to it. The parking lot was almost empty, just a few cars scattered around. No people walking in or out, no chatter or noise coming from the entrance. It was almost like the place was abandoned, but the lights were on, the doors were open, and the automatic sliding doors greeted me with that familiar whoosh. I shrugged it off. Maybe it was late. Maybe this town just didn't get many visitors. But the moment I stepped inside, the unease crept in. The air felt heavy, like something was pressing down on me. The store was quiet. Too quiet, except for the soft hum of fluorescent lights above. The shelves were stocked, the aisles lined with products, but there was something strange about the way the aisles stretched on. They seemed longer than they should have been, the walls farther apart than normal. I thought I was just tired. Maybe the isolation was messing with my head. I grabbed a drink from the cooler and began to walk down the aisles, but the farther I went, the more I felt like I wasn't alone. I passed an elderly woman's stocking shelves in the cleaning supplies aisle. She didn't look at me, didn't acknowledge my presence at all. I tried to give a polite smile, but she didn't even flinch. Her eyes were hollow and focused, as though she wasn't really there. "Excuse me," I said, my voice feeling too loud in the empty store. But she didn't respond. I walked away quickly, a sense of unease creeping into my chest. It was just a Walmart, right? I was being paranoid. But then I realized there were no employees anywhere else. No cashiers. No staff walking around. Even though the store was clearly open, it was as if the whole place was empty. I couldn't find anyone else. That's when I noticed the clock on the wall. The time on the clock was wrong. It wasn't just a little off. It was several hours ahead of the actual time. I pulled out my phone, trying to check the time, but there was no signal, no bars. I checked again, swiping through my apps, but nothing loaded. It felt like something was off. I was starting to sweat, the air too thick and stale for a store that should have been well ventilated. The hum of the lights above felt louder now, echoing in my ears. And still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I walked a little faster, trying to shake the feeling that something was wrong. My shoes made soft tapping sounds against the linoleum floor as I moved deeper into the store, but the place seemed to stretch endlessly. Every aisle I turned into felt longer than the last, the store sprawling out in a way that didn't make sense. The fluorescent lights above flickered occasionally, casting strange shadows on the walls. I didn't want to admit it, but I felt a strange pressure in my chest, like the air around me was growing thicker. I grabbed a random bag of chips from an aisle to calm myself, but as I turned the corner, I froze. A figure was standing at the end of the aisle. A man, tall, wearing a baseball cap and a faded denim jacket. He was facing away from me, staring at the wall, unmoving. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I hesitated. Was he an employee? A customer? I couldn't tell. I cleared my throat, hoping to get his attention. "Excuse me," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. But the man didn't turn. His posture didn't change. I stepped closer, still unsure what to do. I was about to call out again when I noticed something strange. He was standing too still for a normal person. His arms hung stiffly at his sides, his feet planted firmly on the ground as if he was frozen in place. I hesitated. Something wasn't right about this. I took a step back, and that's when I saw it. The shelves behind the man. There was a gap between them, a dark space that didn't look like part of the store's design. I glanced around nervously, then looked back at the man. His face was still turned away, his body frozen, as though he hadn't even noticed my presence. But the gap between the shelves, it moved. It was subtle at first, but it shifted, as if the wall of shelves was somehow alive. My stomach dropped as I realized the space was growing larger. The edges of the shelves were bending, curving inward, slowly pulling apart. I turned around and ran. My heart was pounding in my chest. The aisles blurred as I sprinted past. But as I glanced over my shoulder, the man was still standing there. He hadn't moved, but the dark space between the shelves continued to grow, stretching further than it should. I didn't know what I was running from. I just knew that I needed to get out. I reached the front of the store, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The automatic doors should have opened, but when I pushed the handle, nothing happened. The door didn't budge. I pulled harder, then slammed my body against it, but it was like hitting a solid wall. My mind raced. The doors were supposed to be open. I could see the parking lot through glass, the cars parked out front, the darkness of the night. I wasn't locked in, but I couldn't get out. I turned around and looked back into the store. The lights were dimmer now, flickering more frequently. I could hear something, footsteps, slow and deliberate, echoing through the aisles. My pulse quickened. Was I being followed? I tried the emergency exit at the back of the store. Again, the door was locked. Panic began to rise in my throat. The place felt like it was closing in on me. The hum of the lights above sounded louder now, almost oppressive, as though it was vibrating in my chest. I could still hear the footsteps behind me, but when I turned to look, no one was there. Then came the voice. It was faint at first, so low that I almost thought I imagined it. A whisper, soft and indistinct. But then it grew clearer. You shouldn't be here. The voice wasn't coming from any direction. It was coming from everywhere. The walls, the aisles, the empty corners of the store. It was all around me, like the building itself was alive. I spun around, my eyes frantically scanning the store. But there was nothing. Just the endless rows of shelves, the soft flickering of lights, and the eerie silence. "Hello?" I called out, my voice cracking. There was no answer. The air felt thicker now, like the walls were closing in. I turned back to the doors, my hands shaking as I tried again to push them open. This time, the glass doors moved, but not as they should. They moved inward, slowly, almost like they were bending around me, like the space around me was being distorted. I could feel the ground beneath my feet shift, the building itself warping, expanding, as if it was becoming something else. The air grew colder. I could see my breath. "You shouldn't have come here." The voice again, louder this time, closer. I didn't know what was happening. But it wasn't just the doors that were changing. The space around me was growing. I was being pulled deeper into the store. I couldn't stop it. No matter how much I tried to run, it was like the walls of the store had turned into a labyrinth. Everything felt wrong, and the store wasn't just a place anymore. It was a trap. I tried to steady my breath, my hands shaking as I gripped the handle of the door, with all my strength. The walls around me felt like they were bending inward, like the store was closing in on me. The cold air pressed down harder, and I could hear the faintest hum, a sound that wasn't coming from the lights anymore, but from the very walls themselves. I pulled harder on the door. It wouldn't open. It couldn't open. The doors felt like they were alive, resisting my every movement. I could feel the ground shift beneath my feet again, the tiles warping under the pressure. I spun around and stumbled backward, nearly tripping over my own feet as I gazed around the store. It was bigger now. The aisles stretched farther than before, and the shelves seemed to move, shifting ever so slightly. The store wasn't just a building anymore. It had become a maze, a living, breathing thing that changed when I wasn't looking. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run, but there was nowhere to go. It was like I was in a distorted version of the Walmart I had walked into, like I had stepped into a parallel space where the laws of reality no longer applied. I turned to the left, heading down a narrow aisle that hadn't been there before. The shelves were lined with goods, but none of them seemed real. The labels on the cans, the boxes, they were all wrong. None of the brands were familiar. Everything was off, distorted in a way that I couldn't fully comprehend. Then, from further down the aisle, I saw something. Someone. It was a person. Or at least, it looked like a person. I approached cautiously, my heart in my throat. The figure was standing near the end of the aisle, facing away from me. It was a man, tall, with a flannel shirt, just like any normal shopper. But as I got closer, I noticed something strange. The man didn't move, not an inch, and the more I stared at him, the less he looked human. His posture was too stiff, too rigid. His head was tilted at an unnatural angle, almost as if he was frozen mid-motion. I stopped a few feet away from him, unsure of what to do. He hadn't acknowledged me. His body was so still, I wondered if he was even alive. But then I heard it, that low, guttural sound, a breath. He exhaled, and the sound didn't come from his mouth. It was a rasping, almost mechanical sound, as if something deep inside his chest was malfunctioning. My skin prickled as I took another step back. I looked up at his face, and that's when I saw it. His eyes, they were completely black. No pupils, no whites, just empty, endless void staring directly into mine. Suddenly, his head snapped toward me with a jerk. The motion was so fast, so unnaturally quick, that I staggered backward, gasping for air. His mouth opened wide, wider than any human's mouth should, and a sound came out that was not a voice but a scream, a low, piercing shriek that echoed throughout the store, reverberating through the walls. I turned and ran, not even bothering to look back. My footsteps pounded against the tile, and my breath was shallow, rapid, as I sprinted down the aisles. I could hear something, footsteps, heavy and uneven, pounding behind me. The noise was growing louder, closer. I rounded a corner and stopped dead in my tracks. The entire store had changed again. The shelves were now twisted crooked, as if the entire space had bent and contorted around me. The aisles seemed to stretch on forever, the end of them lost in the thick shadows that now filled the store. The familiar layout of Walmart was gone, replaced with a nightmarish labyrinth of towering shelves and flickering lights. I stumbled forward, my mind racing. The air was thick, suffocating, and it felt like something was closing in on me, something that was watching, waiting. As I pushed through a set of shelves, trying to find some way out, I heard the voice again. Not a whisper this time, but clear, sharp. You can't leave. You're not supposed to leave. It was coming from everywhere, inside my head, inside the walls. I spun around, but there was no one there. No one in sight. Just the endless, distorted aisles and the strange, growing hum that filled the space around me. I had to get out. I had to. I ran again, pushing past rows and rows of empty shelves. The store seemed to grow more distorted with every step I took. The sound of footsteps behind me wasn't fading. It was getting louder, growing closer, until the very air felt like it was shaking. And then I saw it, the exit. I blinked, unsure if my mind was playing tricks on me, but there it was, the automatic sliding doors, standing wide open just beyond the aisle. The light from the parking lot spilled in, casting long shadows on the floor. Without a second thought, I bolted for the door, my legs aching, my chest tight with fear. But as I reached the doors, they slammed shut, blocking my path. I hit them with both hands, my palms slamming against the glass. They didn't budge. The world outside was there, just beyond the glass, but I was stuck, trapped. The doors were solid, locked. I turned around, panting, and that's when I saw it. The man from the aisle was standing at the far end of the store. His eyes locked onto mine again, his face contorted into a grin that was far too wide, stretching across his face like it was made of something that shouldn't exist. You belong here now. I backed away, my heart pounding in my chest. But no matter where I went, the space around me grew darker, tighter. The store wasn't just a store anymore. It was a prison, a trap, and I was never going to leave.